Hello. Hi.
Hello. Welcome to the, closing keynote of Big Sound 2012. My name's Peter Jesperson. I'm in town from Los Angeles. I work with New West Records. Made some records with Ben back in the 2000s, the early 2000s. I guess just starting out, I wanted to just sort of put it out there. I've been a fan of Ben's music since I first heard it. I think like many people, I came to his music by hearing about the Beastie Boys and Sonic Youth and Evan Dando and folks like that raving about him, and that's what first got my attention. And of course, went back and discovered Noise Addict and all that much later. But just to start out, I guess, maybe the first thing, let's cover some basics. You've been doing this since you were very young, younger than most, getting started in this business. What was the music that first turned you on, made you want to do it?
I had a record of a British pantomime of Jack and the Beanstalk, and I used to play that record every day. I knew it. I was obsessed with this album, getting home from kindergarten, first, second grade, and just playing this record over and over. And it was actually, while it sounds sort of not relevant, it was my first experience about being obsessed with an album and understanding that the experience that comes with something being meaningful and listening to it over and over and going into a whole world and the imagination. And interestingly, in kindergarten, the teacher had an emergency one day and there was no backup plan to look after the class, but she knew I loved this record and knew every word. And she said, could you just sit on the desk and do that whole album for them? Because I guess she had an emergency phone call. And now as an adult, I'm like so stressed, like, wow, I wonder what happened. It must have been really bad. But at the time, I was like, here's my chance. So my big break, you know. So I got up and I did the whole record. And when the parents came to pick the kids up 20 minutes later, they were all sitting there and I was singing this Jack and the Beanstalk story. I just remember the mother going, you're naughty, you're lazy, you're a terrible little boy. You know, anyway, point being that the connection was made very early between the experience of being a fan of something and wanting to be engaged in it personally. And it happened completely unconsciously, but a big part of my falling in love with the experience of listening and then wanting to be part of that experience was sort of ingrained early. And so then, you know, Michael Jackson and Tiffany and Debbie Gibson and the Pet Shop Boys and Dragon and then onto Guns N' Roses and Skid Row and Motley Crue and Warrant and then the Hummingbirds and Mass Appeal and the Hellmen. These are Australian, like Sydney punk bands, and the Hard-Ons and the Welcome Mat and Smudge and Nirvana. You know, so this was like a slippery slope, a descent into sort of my musical sort of obsession. You know,
And also your desire to perform certainly stems from maybe that as well.
Yeah, that I didn't really understand at all, but I wanted to do what I was experiencing, what I was on the receiving end of.
Right. You know. So walk us through how you suddenly decided to actually put together a set of recordings and the project that was Noise Addict. How did that happen?
Well, I had two blood brothers when I was 10 years old. You know, we cut our hands and everything, and they both really became proper juvenile delinquents. But we all sort of thought we were at that age. I was really posing. But anyway, we wanted to have a band. You know, we all went to Motley Crue together. That was our first concert, the Dr. Feelgood tour. And we just wanted to have this metal band or a hard rock band or something. And a lot of it was to do with girls, because you remember how you used to get those home videos? Like as a fan, you'd buy the VHS of like someone behind the scenes. You know, the Motley Crue uncensored video had Vince Neil in the back of a limo. They had a jacuzzi. And he had all these girls with their tops off, and it just looked amazing, like just being a musician, you know. So, and I found just startlingly accurate, you know. But anyway, so am I doing something wrong? Should I not be leaning into it, right? Okay, I'll just relax. Okay. So anyway, Anyway, so we always intended to have a band, and at a certain point, when I was 13, I'm Jewish, so I had a bar mitzvah, and basically it's just sort of the original kind of Bernie Madoff pyramid scheme type thing, where you just are trying to get like as much money from your parents' friends as possible. And my thing was, I just wanted to buy an electric guitar, and so I decided, the kind I wanted, a Gibson Les Paul and everything. I knew when I got this guitar, like I couldn't have a band until I had an electric guitar. So everything was from like 10 years old, I wanted to have a band, and I knew when I'm 13, I'm going to get that electric guitar and I'm going to form a band. And I did it, and then I got the guitar, and straight away, no one else was as motivated, because at that age, everyone was still, it's like a fantasy, like they wanted to have a band, but it would just be sitting around talking about it. And I was like, no, let's really have a band. And so I basically had to just pick friends based on really arbitrary reasons to be in the band. Like one kid, his brother had a drum kit, so I made him the drummer. And another guitar, I knew I needed a bass, but I didn't know why, because I just knew bands had basses, but at that age, I still didn't really know what a bass was or anything.
Or what the bass did.
Yeah, but I knew that my friend, Duran, he had a guitar, he had one of those Zoom effects boxes, and it had a bass setting that would just drop your guitar down an octave, and I was like, that's it, you're the bass player, and he'd just pluck on a guitar and those notes, and I don't know, whatever. So that was how I just put a band together. Yeah.
And how about the recordings? Did you do those yourself?
Yeah, well, I wanted to get some kind of a recording device. First, I just had a Sony boombox, and I was just recording straight into it. And it's amazing the gap between, when you have a strong fantasy life, as, anybody who wants to be in the music industry does, I'm sure. Like, there's a big gap between what you think is happening and what's actually happening. But you feel that mysteriously. And my early recordings were very much that. Like, I was literally playing into this boombox, and the qualities you can imagine. I didn't even buy good cassettes. We had a shop called Golo, which was like a chain of 99-cent stores, and that's where I bought my cassettes, because I didn't have much money, and they were the worst cassettes. They would deteriorate every play. You could hear it audibly. But that's where I got everything. So I was singing into this boombox, but to me, it sounded like Pink Floyd's The Wall, or Appetite for Destruction. Like, I was convinced I was making something sonically just dynamic, but it was all my emotions,
Right.
So I knew I'd met Nick Dalton, who's an Australian musician. He had a label called Half a Cow, and I really kind of idolized him because I loved all the records he made. And I asked him what kind of 4-track to buy, and he said he had a Tascam 244. So I bought that, and I didn't even buy a mic. Like, my dad had a mic that was attached to a tape recorder. And again, the insanity of just the fantasy of what I thought I was doing. But that was basically the setup I used. And I was just completely shocked when anyone didn't think that it was recorded properly. Lo-fi would be a flattering type. Like,
right.
I stumbled so ass backwards into a scene that was actually happening called lo-fi, which I never, there were all these great American artists, like Liz Phair and Lou Barlow and all these people that were intentionally doing home recordings, and they knew what they were doing. And that was really where you go, there is luck involved in the universe, because the timing that I just made bad recordings. That's what they were. They were not aesthetically interesting. They were just bad. But there was a market for bad recordings at that time, and everyone thought it was really postmodern and interesting.
Sure.
And
Guided by voices.
Yeah, exactly. So it just fitted right in.
State of the art.
Yeah, so it kind of worked out. Yeah.
Very interesting. So then, how was it that you that music got you to, or got to the ears of some of these sort of quote-unquote celebrity successful musicians that helped you along?
Yeah, well, we had a street press in Australia, which is like LA Weekly or something, like a free newspaper. We had 2 in Sydney, one called On the Street and one called Drum Media. And I can't remember which one it was. I think it was On the Street, that had at the back page industry advice or musicians advice. And it was a list of what to do with your demo. And it said, make your demo, put a photo with it, get all the labels, look at all your records and see what the labels are, and copy down the addresses, send it to them, phone them a week later, check they got it, phone them 2 weeks later. I just followed this instruction, exactly. But it was so bad because, I couldn't even get I was 14. I wasn't going to go and pay and get photos printed, so I just photocopied photos, and then I lost the original. I was sending photocopies of photocopies, which I think really added to the mystique.
Sure.
Again, it seemed lo-fi, and it was just really bad. But I sent it to everybody. Every album I had, I just looked up the record companies, and again, I was getting this feedback from, we have a label, a radio station called Triple M in Australia that is, I suppose not really known for being kind of aesthetically innovative, but rock station. But they, it's good. It plays rock music. So, but I sent it to them because that was the other thing. Sent it to all the radio stations, and I got back this letter. I'm not lying. It said, "Dear Ben, I think your tape sucks." And then it went on. He was like, "Ha ha ha!" But the spirit's great, and keep going. And I was like, I couldn't believe it. I was but anyway.
So were you sending these to American record labels
no,
as well?
No, just Australian. Just
Got
Australian. My fantasy life wasn't that big.
Okay.
But it was pretty big. So anyway, I sent that to everybody. There was a bunch at the time of labels. The labels in Sydney, the indie labels, were generally connected to record stores. There was Red Eye, which was a shop and a label. There was Waterfront. So I just sent it to the record stores, and I called up Waterfront Records, and I'd read an interview with Tumbleweed or Spiderbait or something, or one of the bands on Waterfront, and they'd mentioned this guy called Chris, and I was like, oh, that's got to be the guy. I'll ask for him. And so I asked, can I speak to Chris? And this is Ben from Noise Addict. And this is Ben from Noise Addict. And this other guy gets on the phone.
Did you try to lower your voice to sound older?
Probably, but it's like, when like 14-year-olds who are late into puberty try and lower their voice, like to do phone sex or whatever. I remember staying over at friends' houses and doing like calling in the back of Penthouse magazine, and trying to be like, yes, I'm, anyway. So it's ridiculous. But anyway, I spoke to this guy. This guy gets on the phone, Steven Stavrakis. He goes, Ben from Noise Addict, your tape stood out like dog's balls. And again, I'm having like, is this a compliment? Is this an insult? Because, music industry guys, in Australia too at the time, it was still very like tough, and I was like, I had a thin skin because this is my first thing I made, And then, I was like, is that good? And he said, we loved it. Come on in. And, little did I know, this was a big lesson that continues to be a big lesson throughout my career. And listening to Ian talk and everybody, it's so clear that being unique and not forcing being unique, but it really is the key to everything good that happens to anybody in creative, the creative world. And what I realized is the amount of tapes that these guys were getting every week, and they all sounded the same, and they were all decent and all, but here came this thing, they didn't know whether it was good, bad, or indifferent, but they didn't know what it was, and that piqued their interest,
Right.
So basically that's how, so Steve at the time was doing a deal with Stephen Pavlovic, who they started a label called Fellaheen, and I'm going to skip over all the details. Steve Pav is also a promoter, and so he started playing this music for bands he was touring with, the Sonic Youth and the Beastie Boys and stuff, and so basically that's how I got signed to their imprints in America.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
And then how was it that you you collaborated obviously a lot with Brad Wood. How did that friendship begin?
Well, that happened through Mike D. Like, I remember when I first heard the Liz Phair song, Fucking Run,
Right.
off Exile in Guyville. Firstly, I was 14, so I probably just got a boner. But, because I was just like, oh my God, this is my dream woman. But to hear something so raw and so amazing and so, it just moved me, And when Mike brought up the idea, because I'd made him a tape, so we were doing Noise Addict, but I wrote so many songs. I would write a song a day. So I'd be giving Pav, I'd go down to his place in Bondi and say, hey, here's a tape of my new songs, like 20 new songs. He was like, you just gave me one a week ago. But I just constantly, so he gave one to Mike, and Mike fell in love with all this acoustic kind of stuff I was doing. And he said, let's get you to Chicago to make a record with the guy that made the Liz Phair record, Brad Wood. And I had all this sort of false allegiance to my band that weren't even really a band. Like, they couldn't believe that we'd even had a CD out. And I was like, I'm bringing these guys with me. And these guys were like, what? But anyway, so,
Didn't work.
yeah, anyway, we ended up doing a record with him, and that was all part of it. But yeah, so that was really the start of the whole thing, working with Brad. And yeah.
So you went to Chicago, but wasn't that was Grandpa Wood, right?
Yeah, that was Grandpa Wood.
Didn't you do some of that recording here in Sydney, or those
Yeah, but that was unintentional, because I went and recorded 15 songs with Brad, and I was like, oh, I've made an album. And I get back and I get this call from Mike D. He's like, Ben, it's 26 minutes long. And he's like, that's not technically a full album. Like, we need an album. And I was like, oh, I thought there was so many songs, but some of them were like 45 seconds long. But still, because I came from a different, the Sydney scene at the time was like, Smudge and all these bands that were putting out 7 inches with like 20 songs on it. They were 1.5 minute songs. So that I liked that. I didn't think it had to be long. But then they were just, we've got to make this a full album. So they sent, Brad couldn't come, they sent Casey Rice to finish the record in Sydney. And I started trying to write these long songs. I made it like a couple that got to 3 minutes and,
Right.
Something like that.
So what was the live support at that time? How did you support those records? You came to America and played, obviously.
Yeah, well, in Australia, the bars, the pubs were really quite emphatic about, I wasn't allowed to be in there. Like, we'd play, I'd get off at a show. Exactly, because of the age, And they were really tough about it, like, which I get. I mean, there's, liquor licensing laws and everything, but we really couldn't get many gigs. So the only gigs we'd get was when a bigger band asked us to support them, because that would be an all-ages show. So we, would support Fugazi or, one of these bigger bands that did all-ages shows. But I couldn't, as a result, we couldn't really give our records away in Australia. Like, including my first solo records, they sold 500 copies each, probably, in Australia. So, a lot of people made this thing about, oh, Ben, you moved to America and everything. I was like, there was work. It was pretty a blue-collar decision in a sense. Like, my career in America, there was the college radio thing with CMJ, and they were playing my early records and the Noise Addict records, and we sold 30,000 copies, And so in our school holidays, every school holidays, I'd go to America, and it tripped me out, because it was another scene, Like, we played with Archers of Loaf at Tramps, and Madonna came to the show and all this, and it was like really crazy, because it was also before the internet. Really, the internet, we'd, I think, just gotten it maybe, or I don't know, whatever it was, like, but so I didn't even realize the music had been received that well in America. So when we got there and people were singing to the songs, and it was an incredible thing. But again, it's like, I didn't quite know how that was going to manifest into a career, because what I was surrounded by generally was a fair amount of indifference.
Right.
Yeah.
And who were the players with you at that time? Or you were playing solo?
When I did the solo thing, I sort of put a band together with the people that made Grandpa Wood with me. Like, Brad played drums, Rebecca Gates from the Spinanes played guitar, and Casey Rice played bass. And then when I was here, I had Adam Yee, who was in Smudge. He played bass, and Julie Bennett, a friend of mine from Sydney, played drums. And I'd sort of cobble things together.
Right. And then by the time you got to Grandpa Wood was 95, by the time you got to the second record, Something to Remember Me By, had that been moved up the chain in the States to Capitol, or was that still Grand Royale?
No, that was only Breathing Tornadoes.
I see.
Yeah, well, that was a very interesting record for me, because I was a very, self-indulgent 17-year-old that was just, it's like Morrissey, you're just tortured and writing poetry and thinking every thought you're having, you have to honor it in a song, and, which you sort of do when you're 17. But that record, it didn't have any choruses. I don't know, I just went in a different direction. I mean, this has been the fatal flaw and the key to my career, is that I'm often making a huge tactical error, and I have no realization that I'm doing it. Both when I've tried to do, I guess, like, I always think I'm doing something that people will like. I think that's maybe because I was brought up by parents that, like, overly told me that's a good drawing when it wasn't, or something. I don't know. But basically, like, I just hope for the best every time, and I'm surprised when people, because I don't actually want them to like my music. it's not about that. It's I've always tried to represent honesty in terms of my experience. And that has never really required judgment to me. I've never really said, oh, I need you to say you like it or you don't like it. I just think the point of art is kind of speaking your truth and being heard, you know. But something to remember me by, man, I mean, people really didn't like that record. And that was depressing. So I remember actually Gary Gersh, who was at Capitol, who was possibly, I was going to get upstream to Capitol. Apparently there was a call where he said, Brad Wood is never to get anywhere near a fucking Bentley album ever again. Because, you know, it was like I sort of had this, was about to happen, kind of the alternative artist that was like, I was on MTV and stuff, and then I made this folky record that just had all these words and no hooks or anything, and they blamed Brad for not reeling me in, which I blame him too. No,
frankly.
To a degree, I've actually had this conversation with him, and to a degree, I think his lack of ambition didn't serve either of us at that point, but more important than that, he honored what I wanted to make. And I think that is a style of production that's not done enough.
Right, well, I think that's Brad's thing too. I know him fairly well, and he does want to help the artist make the record that they're intending to make
and
at
he'd
that
prefer
time.
it had hits on it, for sure. I mean, you know, like we all would, like, if you stumble into a hit, that's a great thing, but you never want to make it artificial or make someone feel pressured and have a hit come that way, you know?
Right. But that had the song that was later licensed for Something About Mary, right?
Well, exactly, yeah. So that was the one thing that kind of came out of it that had a little bit of a, and that I don't know, whatever. It's fine. It's it just, you know, some records get a life, especially nowadays. Some records, their life really starts happening 10 years after they're made. So, but at the time, as an artist, you know, I see a lot of young people, I'm assuming they're musicians, like, you're so sensitive about it, and you want that immediate validation, and the reality is, as artists, that you make something and you have no control. Like, it really could be after you're dead that the record finds its audience, and you have to make some degree of peace with that. That has been an ongoing thing that I've sort of slowly grown into. But as a teenager, I mean, there's no way you can comprehend that.
Sure, well, certainly that kind of thing happened with artists through the ages. I mean, painters who weren't recognized when they were alive. So then it was then it was Breathing Tornadoes when Gary Gersh did not win out, and well, you ended up being upstreamed into Capitol.
No, but that wasn't with Brad. I made that record with Ed Buller.
Right.
And that record, I just was ready to give it a crack, you know, whatever that meant. Like, at that age, I was still kind of somewhat slave to the mentality of, I guess you call it Maggie's Farm, you know what I mean? Like, that you got to get famous and successful and do that whole thing. And that was really the beginning of me going, I'm going to try this. And Ed Buller, who produced that record, who's a great producer, tough producer, he just kept going, do you want to be a pop star? You want to be a pop star? You got to write a better chorus. Like, really British, you know? But that's why British people make great pop records, you know? There was no fucking around with that. That was like hits. But not hits in the, it wasn't condescending. He wanted to make good hits. Like, he made Suede records and Pulp records, and he was in the Psychedelic Furs. And in England, pop music was meant to be intelligent and good and huge. You know, so that's kind of what we were going for with that record. And it was the first time I had a hit in Australia with Cigarettes Will Kill You. And it, you know, that was a whole journey, you know,
Speaking of the singing or the performing live, I think the first time I saw you play would have been right after that record came out in, I guess it was April of '99, opening for Rufus Wainwright in Los Angeles.
I didn't know you were there.
Yeah, the Henry Fonda Theater. And one of the things I remember about that, and it's something that seems to be something you've done in your career many times that I thought was very disarming. You walked away from the microphone, sat down on the edge of the stage with your feet dangling over the edge and just sang a song to the audience without the PA. And I think I felt everyone in the room fall in love with you at that moment.
It's a sheer desperation.
Sheer desperation.
Yeah. I mean, you know, as a touring artist, especially I did a lot of supports. That's another mentality I bought into, that you go and then you'll make them your fans, and sometimes.
Right.
You know, generally you never see him again. And the tours cost you money and, you know, but anyway, I did a lot. I supported. And you really do get good at that, how to win over a room cold. And a lot of it's kind of trickery, you know. I mean, not in a bad way, just performer stuff, getting good at being a performer. And you learn stuff like how to get the room to go with you. So yeah, you saw some of that. But I just remember that tour. Rufus has become really nice the last 5-6 years, and especially after he got sober, you know. But at that stage, man, he was a bitch. And he would say it too. You know, he'd be like, he was really into fashion, you know, and I had the same shirt on every day, and he'd kind of like roll his eyes at me. And but anyway, but I love him now. I've toured with him many times since then. But that at an interpersonal level, that was I did not appreciate his mean-spirited quips against my attire.
So then fast forward up to summer 2004, which is where you and I started working together, basically. And for the audience's perspective, I was at New West at that time. A guy by the name of Michael Crumper, who used to work with Danny Goldberg,
He's my manager, yeah.
Had told your then manager, David Leinhart, you were shopping some new songs for what became Awake is the New Sleep. And Michael Crumper, I believe, told David to send the recordings to me. And I remember David and I getting on the phone and David saying I was really reluctant to do this initially because New West was known as sort of a roots rock label, an Americana sort of label. But he said, Michael tells me that you've got a wicked pop streak, and I think you might like these songs. And I remember actually going on holiday after he'd sent me the first 4 or 5 songs and listening to those rough mixes in a rental car up in northern Michigan and losing my mind over them. And that was where I first heard Catch My Disease, and I thought, oh my God, can we really work with this record? This is amazing. I think this is a hit song. So anyway, that was where that relationship began, and you ended up finishing the record. And another one that you did with Brad Wood at what he calls Seagrass there in Studio City, right?
Yeah, that was the first record he ever made at that studio.
Yeah.
I had come off, I self-financed that record, or I should call it mum-financed. I borrowed some money from my mum for that, and I was totally broke, and I don't know, I'd been through the ringer with labels. Grand Royal had gone bankrupt. I'd been on F2, which is like Cornerstone, the marketing company, and that record, nothing happened with, and I was just really, I didn't know what to do really, so I called Brad and I was like, there's got to be a different way to do it. We hadn't worked together for a few years. He said, you know what, I've just started building this studio. Let me make this record here. And it was really, I've learned a lot about the types of atmospheres and energies that produce work that's vibrant, you know? And when people seem to, you know, it's a cliche, but I think when people have nothing left to lose and they just put it on the line and do it for enjoyment, you really can hit some amazing places artistically, and that record was that. Yeah. I was freshly out of, you know, a big relationship and was being highly promiscuous, which just added so much fun to the whole process. You know?
Mm-hmm. And for the people that don't know about this studio, Seagrass is really, it's a guest house really behind Brad's house in a regular suburban neighborhood in Studio City, which is in the San Fernando Valley. And it's a beautiful room and a great vibe to work in there, I think.
Yeah, and he got the message pretty quickly because, you know, for most of us in the industry, like 10 years ago, you started seeing that records needed to be made differently. It wasn't going to be about sales in the same way, and they had to be made cheaper, and bands didn't want to spend all their money paying $2,000 a day in a studio, and, you know, so it was, so Brad, you know, that was really that beginning of that era for him, I guess.
Uh-huh. But it was also, I think, a really a kind of a breakthrough in your career of songs. I mean, there were so many songs on there that, you know, resonated with people, and obviously wildly successful here in Australia. And can you tell us a little bit about where that group of songs came from?
Yeah, that group of songs came from my first trip to India, where I was on the brink of giving up making music. I mean, it's so ridiculous. if you've ever done a career for 10 years and had no training at anything else, when you do consider what your prospects are. And I was sitting in India in these long meditations just going, I can't believe, like, I'm washed up at 24 years old. Like, I'm like Gary Coleman or something. Like, and I mean that with no condescension. I feel for Gary Coleman. Like, when you have success young, not even, because I didn't have that much success, I just had a lot of attention, which can be really, a burden, because if you don't fulfill it, which I hadn't in a lot of people's eyes, in my own eyes it hadn't been about that, but I'd never had the big record that people were sort of banking on me to have. It's really pretty scary. So I was sitting there, and the teacher that I went to see, Narayani Ama, one day called me in and said to me, you're here because you have good karma, and when you have the karma to be a human being and to be, as opposed to being born as a chair, that's my little footnote. But when you have the good karma to have a human birth, the responsibility is here then to do service. And Amma said, what's Ben's service going to be? And honestly, I started crying because that whole time in India, I'd been so blocked about what the next phase of my life was going to look like. And I'd been going to try and help. They had a homeless feeding every day, and I was really bad at it. For some reason, I just kept getting in the way. And I remember the Indians who were like, they were really organized, and it was the kind of thing where it was for me to get, I was like, oh, let me help so I can feel like I'm doing something good. But I'd get yelled at for giving too much or too little, or for getting in the way or bumping into someone. So I'm just like, I don't know how to serve. I don't know what to do. And Amma starts laughing and just says, music. Ben's service is music. And it was such a, obvious thing to say, but something I'd been questioning so much. And then, I don't know if anyone's heard this story, but it still stands out to me as pretty amazing that it actually happened. Amma said to me, this is like an Indian guru who's stayed in rural India his whole life. Looks up and goes, has Ben Lee ever been top 10? And I said, no, Amma, I'm not that successful. And Amma just gets quiet for a long time and goes, Amma will bless Ben Lee to be top 10. If Ben will put Amma's message into music. And I start thinking, the wheels are going, I'm like, oh man, this is when I'm going to be going, come to India, Hare Krishna. I was like, this is every nightmare you have of like the Indian guru reeling in Westerners as like a tourist, thing. And so I'm bracing myself for the worst, and I say, what's the message? And Amma just goes, joy. The message is joy. And for the young people, some pleasure is okay too. But look, it sounds reductive, but that conversation completely changed the next phase of my life. I wrote all the songs off Awake as a New Sleep in the next few weeks. It was amazing period. And it wasn't forced. And look, there are songs like We're All in This Together that almost, a lot of people made fun of it, and because it sort of seemed Pollyannish or something, like overly innocent. But I thought that was balanced out with other songs on the record, like Get Gotten and Debt Collectors, that were darker and in the wake of a breakup. And these were things I was experiencing. I was looking out at the universe and going, whoa, we are connected. We are one thing. This isn't just a hippie bumper sticker. These people I'm seeing waiting to get on the subway, they are me. These are projections. We're connected, which is like trippy, I mean, people got nervous then. They just coughed because it's embarrassing. You know what I mean? It's uncomfortable to say this, and I've spent a long time, pretty much since 2004, in various ways saying this to varying degrees of discomfort from my audience. But this is what changed, and I wrote these songs, and I think people, I don't know if it's joy, people sensed that something special was in the music, and it kind of, life went on a different road then,
I mean, it's obvious that's, as you said when we were talking before, all of your music has had a spiritual element to it, but that's where it really began to show itself more. That explanation sort of begs the question, I mean, not all of us decide to go to India to meditate. How is this how did that come about?
I'm someone who likes extreme experiences. I didn't really like studying at school, although I love books and I like experiences. Everything I've learned from experiences. That being said, those same experiences could have come to me in a different way. I'm not the type of person who thinks everybody has to go to India, everybody has to meditate, everybody has to do psychedelics, whatever the modes are that people have discovered a wider consciousness. I don't think there's one road, but in my particular case, it took a sort of quirky path, unsurprisingly. And, you know, I don't know, I ended up there. It's a long story. We can talk about that later.
Okay.
Yeah, it's not that interesting.
All right.
To me it is, but yeah.
And another interesting element in our early working together time period, I think the first show you did in LA was at the Roxy on the Sunset Strip, a couple doors down from the Whiskey, for those of you who want to know the geography of the strip there. But I don't know if you remember this. Actually, I bet you do. There was a fire in the kitchen and the gig was canceled.
I know, and you know why I was so bummed out? Because Frente was supporting that night. And I'd never gotten to see Frente live, and I loved Frente, and I'd become friends with Angie, and I knew Simon was in town, and I was like, Angie, is there any chance you guys would open as Frente for the show? And she said, sure. And I was like, oh my God, this is my dream come true. And we get there, and I'm watching the band playing before Frente, and suddenly there's smoke, and everyone's clearing out of the building, and I was really bummed out about it. And then I played in the parking lot.
Yeah. So, we all, as everybody evacuates the club, they're all standing around the parking lot. Ben grabs his guitar, comes out, and plays a few songs in the parking lot, which was a great moment. So then the next record that we ended up doing, we went with John Alasia, and you recorded at Village Recorders there in West LA, and made, I think, a record that had 5 or 6 hit records on it once again. I mean, it was another fantastic record. Can you tell people a little bit about how that happened? I mean, working with John Alasia,
this is really interesting. This was like, I was talking to Cam about it, who was running the label at the time, and we described this as our cosmic hand slap. Because what happened was, my whole career, I'd had these like almost moments. And while Catch My Disease was massive in Australia, in America, it was almost massive. Like, it's a kind of song, everyone knew it, no one knew it was by me. It wasn't on the radio, it was on commercials, it was in movies. And it was the kind of thing where it felt like I was about to have this massive hit, and it never happened. And it's really, it sounds so petty, because if you get any level of success, you know, what David Brady was talking about before, it's so rare. Like, you're in the, you know, the needle, the eye of the needle, whatever. But still, you're like, when you're so close to something, you can taste it. You're like, oh, but what if I could just get into that next, you know? So what had happened is, my whole career, in one degree or another, from that fucking Triple M guy onwards, there had always been people telling me in one form or another, if you were a little bit more like everybody else, you could have more success, you know? And something happened with Catch My Disease where it got so close, and I just thought, if I'm ever gonna do this, this is the moment. And I wrote great songs, which I think would have been a regular Ben Lee record produced in a different way. I could have done them at home or something. But I got John Alasia to do it, who's an amazing pop producer. He'd done John Mayer and Evermore and a bunch of different stuff. And we got kick-ass session musicians that did this. I spent a ton of money on this record. And basically, my fans didn't get it because it didn't sound like me. It was like, I called it like, too straight for the underground and too underground for the straight world. You know what I mean? It was like I just made a record that couldn't be digested by anyone, really. But the great lesson in this was like, I really consciously was trying to conform, because I'm not the kind of person that says you shouldn't try, and I think you should try and you should experiment and find out where your limits are and test it, you know? And I know, had I not done that, it would always be a lingering question. Right. I'd still have those voices in my head that, but what if you made a record that had the big drums and the bridges and the whole thing? I'd still be wondering that. And the fact that I did it and it didn't work is the best thing that happened to my career, you know? Because I got to try it and I love the record, but it didn't, had it worked, had I had a massive record, I'd have probably made 4 others trying to follow a formula like that, and that just wouldn't have served me creatively and spiritually in any way.
When I was making notes, I was looking at that Love Me Like the World Is Ending from that record actually charted here in Australia higher than Catch My Disease. Is that really?
Well, Catch My Disease caught everyone so off guard because we didn't realize we were going to have a hit, that by the time we released the commercial single, the song had already, everyone
The arc was
heard it. You know, it was like #1 on radio, everyone had bought the albums. They didn't need the single.
Right.
So again, this record with Ripe, we tried to do it the conventional way and put out the single. So some of those results are just that, I think. It was not successful.
Right. I guess then, just wrapping up the New West era, you decided to make The Rebirth of Venus, which was a very conceptual record, certainly more than Ripe was, maybe a little bit more like Awake is the New Sleep. So tell us about that.
Well, that just the beginning of, what snapped for me with Ripe, this realizing this is not going to work by me trying to play by other people's rules. That part of me just, it got resolved. I don't know. So with The Rebirth of Venus, I went, I'm just going to make the quirkiest record I want to make. And I was really into, at the time, a lot of theories about the environment and the economic situation, and to do with the way that patriarchal thinking has affected the way we use money and the way we treat the environment. And, there's a lot of gender politics that are involved with the way the world's run now.
Mm-hmm.
And I got really into that concept. I was like, I want to make a record that's about the goddess and about the feminine. And so that whole record was really about that.
Mm-hmm.
So I couldn't have made a less palatable record, in a sense that I don't think people at all knew they just knew there was a song called I'm a Woman Too on there. And I think people were just like, what's this guy on about? And so anyway, but it was, yeah.
Yeah. One of the other things that is interesting about, as you were alluding to a couple of the conversations here, we talked about something about Mary and licensing How to Survive a Broken Heart. You've had an amazing track record in the United States with sync licensing, and I think, we sort of joke about it around the office. It's sort of the new radio in America to some degree. A lot of artists are discovered and can reach relative success through that. And you've had, looking at the ABC TV campaign with American television, Verizon and Kohl's doing We're All in This Together, Chase Bank, an ongoing promotion that's used the song Under Control. I mean, that's a pretty interesting aspect of your career and probably fairly lucrative.
Yeah. The last 2 years of my life, I've been involved in some of the most eccentric projects that I've ever been anywhere near. And each of them has been the direct result of, I've got a little kid, and the last couple of years has been financially stable because of some of these syncs. And so while I do feel that, there are occasionally issues that come up, more and more so actually with companies where I don't feel I could be aligned with it.
Mm-hmm.
I still I have a massive amount of gratitude for that these things have come up, and really they've been like patrons to the arts for me,
Right. I guess let's talk about the new record.
Okay.
You've got a very interesting concept, and you only sent the record to me a few days ago. I've listened to it quite a few times. I like it very much. Tell us about it.
Okay, so the new record is about, does anyone know what ayahuasca is? No? You know, okay. So ayahuasca is a hallucinogenic jungle medicine from South America. It's been used safely for thousands of years by shamans in the Amazon, in surrounding areas. And it's something that it's not a recreational drug. It's not something that you can take on your own or go to a party and do. It's the active chemical compound in it is DMT, which is what the pineal gland floods the brain with at death. So the ayahuasca journey is a death and rebirth experience. When you're in it, you are dying. And as a result, a lot of the experiences that people talk about with near-death experiences, having a sense of perspective, seeing their life flash before their eyes, knowing things they have to change, a lot of this is common to the ayahuasca experience. And it's a path that I've been actively exploring over the last few years. And I've made a record called Ayahuasca, Welcome to the Work. And the work is a phrase used by people that work with ayahuasca because it demands a lot of you. It asks you what parts of yourself are lacking, which parts of your integrity are not 100%, and to become a better person, you know. So anyway, I've made this record called Ayahuasca, Welcome to the Work, and it's pretty out there. But again, I see the fame game, you know, it's kind of over. I don't know if it's just for me or for the whole culture, I'm not sure, but I can't think of any less exciting goal. Far more exciting to me is a discussion about what we can each contribute in terms of consciousness and actually offering art that expands ourselves and each other. So I've made this record. Do you want to hear one song? I put one on my iPod. Okay. So this record's not going to come out till March next year. And I'm actually running a Pledge Music campaign at the moment. You should go to pledgemusic.com/project/Ben Lee. And it's been kind of nerve-wracking because I didn't know how many people would resonate with this subject matter, but there's a little video there that explains ayahuasca and explains the record. And it's been exciting because we launched it 48 hours ago and we've already raised 50% of our goals for the record. So it's definitely a new era in terms of the way an artist with an unusual idea can interact with the music industry. Okay, so this song is called Welcome to the House of Mystical Death.
I'm willing to go in. 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 I'm willing to go in.
Live fade. So anyway, so it's kind of non-linear. It's yeah. I think it's got. I don't know. I'm really excited about it. It's a very honest, experimental piece of work for me. And if any of that earlier experimentation with compromise did anything, it allowed me to do this kind of thing. Just going for it. So
I think
so yes, you can pre-order it now. Pledge Music thing if you want to.
I think the singing on this record is the best singing I think I've ever heard you do.
Interesting, because there's not much of it.
Well, but there's well, I think that Invocation at the beginning and the Will to Grow was one where you've got is that you said Jessica Chapnick singing with you on that?
Yeah.
But the intricate vocals that are sort of interwoven, I think it's absolutely beautiful stuff.
Thank you. Yeah, it's one of the first records I felt. It's really interesting because there's a lot of belief systems that go along with being in whatever role we take in life. And as a musician, as a singer-songwriter, here's this guitar and here's my voice, and every song has to have them both on it. And you forget why, right? So with this, we were starting from an emotional or an atmospheric point of view, where the initial thing we wanted to do was capture a feeling. So whatever tools were at our disposal, we'd use. So about only half the record has vocals on it, and I think that is, I'm only singing when I want to be singing. I think that's why they're better. Because when you're doing something you don't really want to be doing there, it's not very fun to listen to.
Who are the players with you on this record, besides Jessica?
Yeah, me and Jessie, we wrote all the songs together too.
Oh, really? They're co-writes.
She performs under the name Apollonia, and I produced her record. She's amazing. Yeah, the players are, so me and Jessie, Guy Blakesley, who plays in a great LA psychedelic band called the Entrance Band. Jason Lader, who's a musician who worked for Rick Rubin for a bunch of years. I mean, it was sort of song by song. We just, when I needed people, I'd call them. But, I mean, I did most of the stuff on it.
Yeah, I think this is it's a beautiful record anyway. I think there's all as you talked about the transformation, there's a lot of, the rhythmic stuff going on, and it's a very euphoric feeling record in many places, I thought. I guess that we've got about 8 minutes left of this. Do we want to open
8 really short questions.
Yeah. If anybody has any questions, now's the time.
Hey.
I think you do a lot of co-writing with many artists, Australian artists, and I've done it. I just wonder, what's that experience like for you? Do you enjoy it? Do you think it's a good thing for artists to seek out co-writing, and what's the best attitude to have?
Right. Co-writing, he was talking about. I've gotten a bit bored with it recently, actually. It's something I focused on for a lot of years. I mean that with nothing disparaging about co-writing. No, let me totally rephrase that. There's a type of co-writing that I was doing for a long time that I've got on board with, which was because I'd had a couple hit songs, artists that hadn't had hits were teamed up with me in the hope of making hits. And that, obviously, judging by the last record I just played for you, is not where my head's at. And I'm just finding that really boring. At the same time, this whole record is a co-write with my friend Jessie, but we weren't trying to make hits, obviously. We were vibing on each other creatively, So I think there's room for both. I think most great hit songs that are on the radio are co-writes, especially now that production is so involved in what a hit is. Often that begins at the writing level with a beat or with some, a production thing. So I'm always open to it. I mean, I feel bad even saying I'm bored, because tomorrow there could be something that I get really psyched about. It's something I explored really intensely for a few years, and I'm kind of on a different trip right now. So, but it's good. I mean, you should do it. You learn a lot about different ways of writing. which is really, I would encourage. If you are a writer, write with as many people as you can in as many different ways as you can.
Anybody else?
You covered an album by a band called Against Me.
Hmm.
What was your connection with that record, and is there another album you'd do a similar thing?
Yeah, so if you didn't hear, there's a band called Against Me, and they made a record called New Wave, and my friend Tegan from Tegan and Sarah sang on that record, so I was interested in hearing it, and I think I was on the plane to Australia to promote Ripe, and I have this weird thing with promotion and interviews where unless I'm working on something else, I get completely sidetracked by the unimportant things in life, you know, like, because you get neurotic and just worried about the performance of the album and all that, so I always try and keep myself working on a project. And I didn't have one. I heard this album and I loved it. New Wave is a great record. And I just went, I've heard of these times artists cover a record beginning to end. I'm going to do it for this one. And that was it. So, and I just put it, you could download it for free on the internet, and became friends with those guys, you know.
Hi, Ben.
Oh, I got a microphone, fancy
yeah, I
pants.
got one. You're a very, very interesting character, and I think I really like you a lot.
You're not sure, but yeah.
What I want to know, this Amazon drug thing, is this legal?
Medicine. It falls into a legal grey area, to be honest with you, because from what I understand, the reasons are, I mean, this is a very complex discussion that I'm not qualified to have, but from what I understand, DMT is the active compound in it, which is actually present in the human body, which makes things very hard to outlaw. It's like outlawing blood, you know, or adrenaline. Further to that, there's another issue with it in that it's falls under the religious freedoms protection. So there are churches like the Santo Daime Church that uses it as part of their rituals. So it's protected in America under that statute. But it's a kind of thing, it's kind of an evolving discussion, I think. Part of the issue with this record, that I wanted to mention was 100% of the album artist royalties are going to be going to charity. And those two charities are, one is the Amazon Conservation Team, and the other one is the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies, who are interested in the safe and contained use of psychedelics in therapeutic settings. So this is a big conversation that I'm really interested in, and I'm interested in learning about. Obviously, post-60s, Albert Hoffman, when he created LSD, it was never intended to be a recreational drug. He was shocked that people used it recreationally, and all the fear kind of stuff that came up in America, and it really threw the baby out with the bathwater. So I was interested, not that I have a belief about it, like I said, I don't think everyone needs to do psychedelics, but I think it's an ignored discussion. So I'm happy to support it with this record.
Anybody else?
I don't wear it much anymore. I wore it to I got married in India, and then we had to do a civil marriage at home, and my stepdaughter, she got to pick our clothes, and she picked my gold suit. So I think that was the last time I wore it. Yeah? All right. Thanks for listening, guys. Oh, you going to someone? No? All right.
I guess that's it.
Okay.
Thanks very much.